Good to see you all. All right, we are live. So I'm just gonna offer a few words of introduction here to chapter 6. First, I want to, share my screen here. So in this chapter, chapter 6, Steiner's talking about the future, the present and the future evolution of the world and of humanity. He begins by telling us that basically whatever we can know about the present and the future is already latent in the past. And as we know, the earth contains within it the facts, the spiritual facts, and the spiritual deeds which were accomplished on Saturn, Sun, and Moon evolutions. That's all enfolded in the earth now. And Steiner describes this process of a kind of cosmic anamnesis or recollection, which does depend on the cultivation of these higher organs of supersensible perception. But he describes the way in which, in order to perceive, supersensibly perceive what the future will bring, we first have to remember the past. And the first stage of this is to remember the old moon. And as we perceive spiritually the old moon as it is still present supersensibly on Earth now, the form of the moon that didn't become mineral. We then begin to see also the old moon as it was before the Earth materialized, mineralized. And it's in remembering the old moon that we then get a sense for uh, the germ of Jupiter and the present Earth. So it's as if we, in recollecting old moon, gain the capacity um, to see the future Jupiter state. And similarly, as we develop deeper clairvoyant capacities, we begin to perceive old sun, and through that, to foresee uh, the Venus state, and then old Saturn, as we recollect that, we begin to perceive Vulcan, right? And so there's a sense in which we have to go back to go forward, and Steiner leads us through that. So there's a sense in which Jupiter, the next phase of planetary evolution after the Earth, is already supersensibly perceivable, as Steiner says, as spiritual sound, spiritual light, and spiritual warmth. And he really wants to emphasize that we can't learn anything about past or future planetary epochs via our ordinary sense perceptions or intellectual abstractions. Um, while we can follow Steiner in his account of the past without ourselves being clairvoyant, we can just use our normal thinking abilities to understand even what we cannot yet spiritually see. Steiner says that the future uh, planetary epochs are different. He says that it is impossible for man to contemplate future events with the same candor and detachment as those that have already taken place. He then looks at the way that the various post-Atlantean cultural epochs, in some sense, mirror and recapitulate the planetary epochs in the same way that um, we have to remember old moon to foresee Jupiter. Steiner talks about the way in which there's um, a resonance with the third uh, cultural epoch, the Egypto-Chaldean epoch, and the fifth post-Atlantean epoch, which we are currently in. But that what for the ancient Egyptians say was sort of revealed to them through a kind of um, revelation from without will be rediscovered, is being rediscovered by us in the fifth epoch through our own um, inner agency. That we feel ourselves now increasingly as spiritual beings after the Christ event, living in a spiritual world. And so we are uh, rediscovering what the Egypto-Chaldean people received as a kind of revelation after having grown these new powers of intellect and sense perception that individuate us further. And so the return to the kind of insight into the spiritual world that the Egypto-Chaldean peoples had is now undertaken with deeper consciousness and more agency, mostly as a result of not only these new capacities of uh, refined thinking and feeling, but also because of what the Christ has brought to the earth. But Steiner describes that, during the prior cultural epoch, the fourth Greco-Latin period, when intellect was really being forged, uh, very few could actually perceive in a spiritual way what the Christ event represented. Many people only perceived it as a physical occurrence and they learned about it through tradition, but it was still powerful for their feeling enough for this external form of Christianity to spread rather quickly around the planet. Um, but Steiner thinks that actually, as he's mentioned earlier, Christianity's influence is only just beginning, and that most of the uh, evolutionary influence that Christianity will have on humanity is yet to occur. It's a still unfolding into the future. Steiner describes what he calls Grail knowledge, or the science of the Grail, which for him it relates to the Christ mystery and this esoteric side of Christianity. While, as I mentioned, externally it seems like Christianity has really been a powerful cultural force in the last few thousand years. There's this esoteric aspect of it, this seed that um, we need to continue to water that will flower into the future. And Steiner says that this esoteric aspect really needs to be more widely understood today. And I actually just wanted to read a few lines here from the middle of chapter 6, page 350 in my book. He says, "We are now living at a time when the higher knowledge needs to be far more widely received into this general consciousness of mankind than hitherto. It is with this in view that the present work has been written. And as the cultural evolution of mankind absorbs the knowledge of the Grail, in the same measure will the spiritual impulse of the Christ event become effective. Its true significance will be revealed, and it will grow from strength to strength. The more external development of Christianity as hitherto, will increasingly be supplemented by the inner esoteric aspect. What man can come to know by dint of imagination, inspiration, and intuition of the higher worlds in unison with the mystery of Christ will permeate people's thinking, their feeling, and their willing ever increasingly as time goes on. The hidden knowledge of the Grail will become manifest and grow to be a power in man's life, entering ever more fully into the ways and walks of man." So there's then this I mean, for me it feels um I feel very negative. I feel bad feelings. I feel resistance to the things that Steiner introduces next. That I've heard about him say in other lectures that there will be this sort of speciation event. Basically, not every human being will decide to evolve. Some will decide on an evil path, um, but that enough human beings will stay in harmony with the deeper mission of the earth to really bring love into this evolutionary process, but others will be held back. Um, and only some human beings will be able to remain part of Earth evolution as the moon returns and reunites with the Earth, and then the sun returns and reunites with the Earth. And then we go through this cataclysm on Earth. There will be another seven cultural epochs. I think I'm tracking that right. And then the period of Pralaya before the Jupiter period begins. And on Jupiter, um, the mineral realm is gone. The lowest realm is then the plant realm or the transformed plant realm, um, animals, and then the fallen humans, and then ascended humans. Those become the four kingdoms on Jupiter. And Steiner says that most of the work of the ascended humans on Jupiter is spent taking care of the fallen humans, trying to ennoble them. And so that, helps assuage my negative feelings a little bit. And it's not that I say I have these negative feelings because I'm necessarily rejecting what Steiner is saying here. It's just, it's really hard to accept this splitting, and that, it would be so much nicer if everyone could come along for the evolutionary ride, but it doesn't seem like if I really take a solemn look at the history um, of the Earth and of the evolutionary process, this is part of what it entails, and it's painful. Um, After the Jupiter phase, there's Venus, at which point even plants disappear. The lowest kingdom on Venus is the animal realm, the transformed animal realm, and then 3 degrees of human kingdoms above that, right? And so this speciation, in a sense, continues as um, some human beings fall away from the path towards love and spiritualization, and others continue on it. At the Venus stage, there's even this excretion of what Steiner refers to as an irreclaimable moon, which contains all the beings who have fully refused evolution. And so up until that point, it seems as though there was some opportunity for redemption. Um, but once this basically, it sounds like a moon abortion takes place, there are some beings who can no longer be part of the forward flow of evolution. Um, Steiner says that, it's in our fifth epoch that we're really sowing the seeds for these future planetary stages. And Steiner says that it's in this fifth epoch that human beings begin to know that the experiences and achievements of our own inner life, in our intellect, in our feeling, in our character, and our strength of purpose, that in these inner movements of our soul, we're planting seeds of a future spiritual world, a world that's still in process of becoming. So what is internal to us now will become, in some sense, our environment later, right? Our own thinking, feeling, and willing will become like the kingdoms of nature that we see in the sense world around us. We're building that spiritual environment within ourselves right now. Steiner then, at several points, mentions that, in that he's able to depict these future planetary epochs, it might seem like all of his foreknowledge is somehow incompatible with human freedom, but he suggests that this is not the case, and that would be a materialistic way of looking at it, and we really need to distinguish between the evolution of human forms and the evolution of the destinies of individual human souls. That these are really two distinct paths of spiritual research. And so it seems that while basically the outlines of the future can be seen to the extent that seeds have already been sown in the past, the destinies of individual souls remains a matter of individual freedom. And so those human beings which fall out of the main thrust of this evolutionary process towards greater love and spiritualization have decided on that freely, apparently. And those human beings who do stay on this path of transforming wisdom into love and further spiritualization they seem to be mostly in the business of trying to help these other humans who have fallen away. Um, and so this is both an account of an evolutionary process which, as a result of the Christ event, will succeed, and yet there's tragic loss all along the way, and yet without, I think, this freedom to choose between good and evil, love could not be realized. And so that's the nature of the evolutionary process. Um, I'll read a couple more lines here from the end of the chapter, and then I'll open it up. Steiner says on 357 of my book, he says, "It is the sublime sun being of whom we had to tell when describing the evolution of the Christ event, who at his revelation stands forth as the all-embracing prototype of love. Into the innermost depths of man's being, the seed of love is thereby planted. Thence it shall grow and spread until it fills the whole of cosmic evolution, even as the pristine wisdom now reveals its presence in all the forces of nature and all the sense perceptible outer world upon earth. So in the future will love be revealed, love as a new force of nature, living in all the phenomena which man will have around him. This is the secret of all future evolution. The knowledge man acquires, and also every deed man does with true understanding, is like the sowing of the seed that will eventually ripen into love. Only inasmuch as love arises in mankind is true creative work being done for the cosmic future, for it is love itself which will grow into the potent forces leading mankind on towards the final goal, the goal of spiritualization. All right, I will stop there and open it up. Laura, please.
Hey, yeah, thank you for the recap. And I just um, was thinking about this resistance to the idea of a irredeemable moon, an evolutionary path that does not lead to love. And you know, if this is a spiritual necessity, if this is one of the laws of the spirit, and if it is, then is there then some dependence for the evolution of love on these um, these beings who choose the other path, these and also if they choose that path out of knowledge or if they're choosing it in darkness, because I've found that I myself have chosen darker paths in the past, and it was the knowledge that I gained through studying spiritual science that affected me in a way where, I mean, love came back into my life, and hope and purpose. And just like the sort of the polarity of the rarefaction of warmth all the way to life ether, and the densification of it all the way to the solid earth, this sort of seeming spiritual condition of polarity that is part of um, an a law. And then how do we come back around to unity from that? Is there, I mean, Rudolf Steiner himself can only see so far into the future. So this irredeemable moon, I don't know. It's just it is a big question. And I think when I first read it and heard about it, part of the reason why I was so resistant to it was that I considered myself as um, a possible resident of that moon. Like I didn't see that I was living in such a way that would guarantee me to not be part of that. Especially if when I leave this incarnation and move into the next, I have to forget everything that I already know and start again. So yeah, those questions definitely are humbling, humbling questions.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I share a lot of those thoughts with you. You asked good questions there for us all to contemplate. Jeff, please.
Good morning or good day to everyone. I guess, Matt, I'll pick up something very important. You're sharing your feeling response to this content, which is interesting in itself. We could certainly just have a conceptual discussion about all of this. But yeah, I think, and what Laura is saying as well, I'm sure we're not the only ones, kind of having a feeling response to this content. Steiner even gave us the reason for that. He said, looking to the future, this is just human nature. It engages our feeling and our willing functions, right? So there it is, like here we are, kind of thing. Um, yeah, there's kind of a whole world of thoughts I have about all of this, and I kind of want to say something a little more focused rather than try to find my way through all my thoughts right now. Um, and that for this chapter, really for the book as a whole, the book in general, it's kind of been a an ongoing meditation for me on everything that Steiner is saying. It's this grand framework, of human evolution and planetary evolution. And I've been meditating on all of it for obvious reasons on all that is being implied for therapeutics. In fact, I've taken a whole bunch of notes on that topic. I think, I think I have a pop-up in me, to bring to this group. It's just a question of when I could make the time to do it, but I think it's a very powerful reflection. But yeah, specifically to this chapter, to the whole book, this idea of, let me just start here with this point, this idea of you coming to that point of the four kingdoms really becoming, three kingdoms of humanity, um, plus the fourth kingdom. As the Earth transforms through the planetary cycles, we kind of get this speciation, the word you use, Matt, of humanity into different parts or factions, whatever word we want to use. And therapeutically, well, there's many things I could already relate to that, but I'll say one or two. One is we get like let's turn to Wilhelm Reich and his therapeutics, and we get this kind of like when he was talking about the disappearance of the mineral kingdom. I'm going back to Steiner here, and then this kind of fallen segment of humanity, and the disappearance of the mineral kingdom. We kind of can overlay these ideas and get this idea of this mineralization of those lower human beings. And we can even relate that to today, to Wilhelm Reich, to other therapeutics, that this kind of mineralization of the lower segment of humanity is already happening. Right? Let's say we get Wilhelm Reich's work and the armoring structures and the really, rigidified or mineralized personalities, people who just are kind of locked into, like, some actors or actresses end up playing character roles. Oh yeah, that actor always plays this type of character or whatever. They kind of get, what's that called? Typecast. Well, non-actors, like some humans, more and more humans, are kind of become typecast, kind of become mineralized. And we have all of Wilhelm Reich's therapeutics. Again, that's its own world. We're not going to go into all of that. But the other point, maybe I'll leave it at this, is, and this is very, very living and real to me. I've been living this for a long time, is just purely at the more simple level of the application of homeopathic medicine. Well, quite directly, quite simply, we have like anything, any substance of nature can be a homeopathic remedy. It's just a question of, what is it, what is a given medicine similar to in a given disease state in a given person. So we take our homeopathic remedies from mainly from the three kingdoms of nature, you mineral, plant, animal, and then of course we have other sources as well. Which, for example, take us into what's called organotherapy. We can take healthy heart tissue and turn that into a homeopathic remedy, or kidney, or actually quite fascinating. I'm in the middle of studying the homeopathic remedy made from placenta. Absolutely fascinating remedy. Been studying lately. Uh, big story there. But my main point here being is, yeah, this fall into the three segments of humanity is a mirror of what we kind of have in our current form of the plant, mineral, and animal kingdoms, as I know them very concretely as these homeopathic remedies and matching them to these disease states of mind and states of being of humans of today. So we already see these future phases in their early formation now. So I say I can have so many thoughts here, but I just kind of wanted to lay out a bit of an idea, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, that's helpful, Jeff. Just to look at the evolutionary stratification as it currently exists on the Earth, it's already prefiguring this situation if we're sensitive enough to it. Um, yeah. Karsten, please.
Yeah. I just want to share some ideas that come from this Danish teacher that I've mentioned on occasion, Martinus, who's, his ideas are very close to Steiner's in many ways, but without him ever, he didn't know anything about Steiner, but he also talked about a split like the one Steiner is talking about. So Martinus had the vision that he was quite specific that within the next 3,000 years, planet Earth would move into Christ consciousness, and that would mean that there would be, say, conditions for incarnation for this group of people who are ready to individually move into Christ consciousness and becoming a part of that field. But the way Martinus saw it was that this move into Christ consciousness would not be attractive to everybody, simply because they hadn't, say, morally matured to a stage of evolution where it was attractive, or where it will be attractive then to move along with planet Earth. And so they would simply have to incarnate on other planets in the universe, lacking a little behind planet Earth, where they have the conditions necessary for them to fulfill their own aspirations and deepest desires. So Martinus saw this as it's a natural part of evolution. It's like you already see that with the changes of the planets. For example, there are some animals in the past that don't have conditions for incarnation on this planet anymore, and so many of these forms, they still exist, but they exist according to Martinus's view on other planets, and so souls who are kind of resonating with these forms will be able to incarnate on all these other planets in the universe with living beings and animals and humanities and so on. So Martinus didn't see it as some kind of, it wasn't like a judgment. It was simply, it's not attractive for everyone to make this move because they have other aspirations. And this also, it relates to something else that I've been thinking about reading this chapter, and what Steiner is saying about this is not a fatalist view, that we progress due to our own desires and what we want to as each individual soul. There's freedom in the picture, so we can do whatever we want. We don't have to follow planet Earth in its evolution. And I think this may be a bit messy, but I think somehow what I wanted to say relates to what Lorenzo has been mentioning on occasion, this thing about time and how the future can somehow, inform actions in a way in the present. And I think in particular when we talk about moral space, we have these ideals, for example, the Christ event, which is very central according to Stein on this planet, and this was also the view of Martinus. It's something that happened in the past in a sense, but at the same time, it's the manifestation of an ideal which lies ahead of us in the future. And so somehow this ideal, which in a sense is in the future, is informing our actions in the present to the extent that we are inspired by this ideal. So, and even if you take a simple thing like us coming together to this meeting, if a physicist was to kind of create a mathematical model to describe our behaviors leading up to this meeting, he would somehow have to include in his model how the anticipation of this meeting kind of shaped and informed our actions in previous weeks. And also, I think it relates to something that I heard Rupert Sheldrake say once, something about the Godhead, or you could call it the feminine aspect of the Godhead, that the way that the Godhead kind of exercises its power is by being attractive to us. So it's a bit like the Aristotelian picture of all things striving for perfection. So in Aristotle's view, the Godhead kind of represent that perfection that we are striving towards, but the power that the Godhead has over us is simply being an attractive ideal, something for us to strive for, to become man created in the image of God, rather than this traditional view where God is kind of pushing us to become, create us in a kind of causal sense. So there's some kind of efficient causality at work in the traditional picture, where God created us to be human beings in the image of God. Whereas if you turn it around and you see God as something, as an attractor, something we strive towards and want to be like, and the Christ being the manifestation of what it means to be created in the image of God, but as an ideal we can look forward to, and it's a future ideal that inform our actions in the present. Yeah, it's a bit messy, but that was what I wanted to say right now.
Obviously, you probably know this, between Whitehead's process theology and Aristotle's view of the divine as this source of allurement that or attractiveness that draws us towards it. And so Whitehead would say that the power of God is the worship that God inspires. The power of God is the worship God inspires. So another way of saying what you laid out for us so eloquently. Lorenzo, did you have something? Your hand went down. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just put it down in advance. And yeah, I will link directly to what Carsten was saying, because I had already had in mind of speaking about that, but what he said further stirred me. And I would like to state again what Carsten said, maybe with a slightly different twist. He said, I agree with the idea that there is some kind of future already there attracting us, or at least interfering with us. But I would say that the ideal, that is, as Carsten said, like an attractor, some kind of passive force, might be seen as a passive force because maybe it's not already there, the ideal, but it needs, as Carsten said, the efficient cause or something that we do to actually be realized. So I will try to state this all back again. I think that the main twist I want to give to what Carsten said is in going back to my reading of Lucifer and Ahriman. If we think that Lucifer is the feedback coming from the future, as it would be without free will. We could imagine that without free will, things just go on mechanically, and a future, what we might say, temporary future starts exist, a temporary final point starts existing in a determinate state. This final state starts feedbacking with the human being when Lucifer appears. And why does this feedback appear as Lucifer? Because when you get feedback in the present from that future, that mechanical future, then of course the I gets aspiration, becomes aspirational, and the feedback manifests itself as a possible future where the whole universe becomes the image of that I. And so we get this kind of force, this kind of upward, ambitious, idealistic force. But since there is not just one human being in which this feedback is being activated from the future, when the future gets saturated by this feedback mechanism, a second kind of force appears, Ahriman, which deals with creating one's own liberty together with the others. So it's a kind of opposite force to Lucifer, where actually it's the well-being or the aspiration of the whole of society that reflects back on the single I, constricting it. And it's very interesting that in the last chapter, Steiner said that we have two guardians of the threshold, and that there is a link between the adversaries and the guardians. We might also say that they are sort of the same thing. So we say that when one goes beyond the guardian of the threshold, a new part of the possible, one new a new world, let's say, opens up. And so maybe to go back to what Carsten said, I wouldn't say that the ideal is already there. Otherwise, maybe there is some kind of fallacy when one says that there is also the need for an efficient cause that immanently from the present builds that ideal. Maybe we just get a feedback from the future, not an ideal future, just the future as it would be without free will. And this, in turn, creates a reaction in us. This changes that future. And I would like to say to quote what Steiner says at the beginning of the last chapter we read. I have it in the beginning of the second page of this last chapter, when Steiner says that further observation shows that in this future form, he's speaking about the fact that we the same state of consciousness that can see the moon stage can also see in it the seed for the Jupiter stage. So he speaks about this future form. This future form in some way, inside this future form in some way, continuously flow the results of everything that is happening on the earth right now. So it's not the image of the future as it will be when we get there. It's the image of a temporary future of how everything would be without our free action. And so I think this links back to what I was saying about, let's say, Lucifer or Ahriman as feedbacks from temporary futures. And so that's why we also can speak about a passive force or a feminine force, because it's not really there. It's the feedback deck that changes our action, and then a second level of feedback that changes it again. And these feedbacks are guardians of the threshold. They are not if the ideal was already there, they would not appear to us as adversaries or guardians of the threshold. They are guardians of the threshold because we actually have to develop another dimension of freedom, and this is how we evolve, and we causally, as an efficient cause, change those future, finally creating the ideal that is just the product. I mean, the ideal in the masculine or um, realized sense, that is just the final stage and actually needs all the evolution to get there. Okay, I hope I kind of managed to express myself clearly. Thank you.
Yeah, lots to reflect on there. I have something to share, but I want to let Karsten chime in first since you were responding to him.
Yeah, I just want to agree with this thing that even though we have the image of Christ in the Christ event, of course, we're not called to imitate Christ in any kind of outward sense. That would be a fallacy. So I agree with this thing that the image of the future is not fixed, but still we are presented with an image that we have to work with. And so another thing I want to add is that I also see there's some kind of oscillation between, you could say, causality and intentionality, where you could say to the extent that we are unconscious, evolution will have to push us. It's like if we're not receptive for education by teachers or masters or whatever, life itself will have to teach us, and that will often be in a rather harsh way, making us suffer somehow until we wake up and become more conscious. So there's this push and pull and kind of oscillation between them, and we need the push to the extent that we're unconscious, and to the extent that we become conscious participators, and conscious in the sense that we both have feeling and intelligence. It's like when you play music, it's not enough to learn technically how you play the music. You have to be able to play it with feeling as well. And it's the same in life, you could say. And Stein has also mentioned this thing, the harmonization of intelligence and feeling that is needed for us to be able to move forward. So I just see this oscillation between, I call it causality and intentionality, that is happening, and that's somehow related to what extent we are conscious participants in the process.
Yeah, thanks, Karsten. Lorenzo. I mean, Lorenzo, as you were speaking, laying out this view of the future ideal as still being developed by the decisions made in the present, I thought of a musical analogy that, these prior planetary epochs have laid down notes, and those notes are part of the chord that allows the earth to be what it is. Or we could think of this as a melody. And, when we listen to music, there's a certain way in which resolution can be achieved. And there might be several ways that resolution can be achieved in the course of a melody. There's not just one way it can be resolved, but it must be resolved. And so given the notes that have already been played, there's only certain kinds of resolutions available in the future. But there's still an ability to, there's always room for improvisation. And yet we can't undo what's already been done because it's what we are now, right? And so that factors into the sorts of harmonization that would still be available in the future.
Uh, sorry, James, if I may just say something relating to what just Matt said. Yeah, maybe the idea of the adversaries as feedbacks coming from the future might find an analog in what the second theme in a sonata form is. There is a melody going on, and there are many ways it can resolve. Okay, but it's kind of a limited universe, and you're constrained in a kind of short form. But then you get this wholly different theme that breaks with the elements that you already had there and creates a lot more possibilities. And then the two themes are to be are to confront themselves. And I think that the feedback from a final point in the future, and then a second level of the feedback that is imagining Ahriman like the feedback of the other Lucifers coming from your own future, uh, can be seen as something as different dimensionally from what was already there in the present as a new theme, a whole new theme coming in, and so expanding everything like what the sonata form did with the musical tradition.
Yeah, thanks, Lorenzo. I like that. I want to get to Ali's question in the chat, but I'll let James let you go first, and then Ali, I invite you to share your question if you want, or I could read it. But go ahead, James.
Okay. I've been reading the Meditations of the Tarot, and the Magician card, and it talks about method of analogy. And like there's the method that's in space, above and below, as above, as below, and that's more of a symbolic one. But he also the analogy of mythology, which is in time. You know, the archetypes going through time, the future. And one of the examples I gave of mythology is the Cain and Abel story, and that's about hierarchy and the story about it. And I think we have that archetype of hierarchy where it has to go through time, and like some people not making it is an archetype of hierarchy for me. I don't know if it's, but and if you look, I mean, Tomberg, I supposedly wrote this meditation on the tarot, and he talks about he's a student of Steiner, but him bringing this magician's card, that's what it's from, and with that mythology of Cain and Abel, there are that the basically hierarchy is what we live through, and I think there aren't going to be people because they're just not going to make the hierarchy, and it's a sad truth, but we live it every day. So I just want to leave that thought, and that's something to do with time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James. That relates to Ali's question, actually, which I'll go ahead and read for us. Does anyone worry about the potential hazards that might come with the temptation to characterize those who aren't Christians as somehow under-evolved or underdeveloped? I'm drastically oversimplifying things out of the desire to try and not let the essence of the point get lost in terminology. And I feel like this could be articulated with more nuance. But I have to admit that at this part of the book, it's something that was coming up as a sticking point for me. I feel like this also really starts to tie back to the conversation on racial topics in Steiner's work and reception. Yeah. I mean, that's part of where my negative affect comes from in reading about this hierarchy, basically, as James was saying, which even if it is put into the context of reincarnation and free choices that are being made all along the way by individuals, it still um, is hard to accept. And I think, one way that I can respond to this, which may in fact be different from Steiner's view if we consider what he says in 174b, which we've discussed in the past. But, from my point of view, I think there could be people who refer to themselves as Buddhist, like the Dalai Lama. The current Dalai Lama might be more Christian than a lot of people who refer to themselves as Christian, in the sense that the Christ impulse is alive and well. And so when Steiner distinguishes between the external and the internal forms of Christianity, the exoteric and the esoteric, I think the key there is that what gets called the Christian religion and all these Christian churches might have, in some cases, very little to do with the Christ impulse. It's an inherited tradition. It got mixed in with Roman imperialism thousands of years ago. It's now mixed in with American imperialism. That that might actually be more of a Luciferic Ahrimanic deception than the esoteric core of the Christ impulse, which could be alive and well in people who don't use that word, who don't think of themselves as members of any institutionalized Christian church and so on. Um, so that's one way of thinking about this. It's not so much that we would want to or be tempted to characterize those who aren't nominally Christian as somehow under-evolved. It could be that those who refer to themselves as Christian loudly and proudly right now are, in fact, furthest from the Christ impulse. So that's one way that I would think about that. But I've definitely had some concerns about how this could be interpreted um, if we're not careful. Did anyone else want to chime in on this issue? It's, Bruce, please.
Well, I was going to say almost exactly the same thing, and I wrote just as you began speaking. I just finished up writing something in the chat that essentially said the same thing. The only thing I could add is that so there was an interesting phenomenon that happened in Buddhism around the year 0. I mean, not exactly, approximately, but and I'm not a Buddhist scholar, so we have to take this really as a tentative hypothesis here. But my brief look at some of the very early texts of Tibetan or Great Vehicle Buddhism from just before, say around 100 BC, they lack the warmth that we find in the more contemporary, sometime after that, the warmth that we find in contemporary Tibetan Buddhist writings. And I'm not sure where that warmth came in, but I suspect it was around the time of Christ's birth. And so I think for me, if I take Christ as someone who's an active being in world evolution, I don't have a problem of seeing him, we're stuck with these words here, him active in other religions. And I think I see it most clearly in this transition from Theravada to Mahayana Buddhism, which took place at around the same time as Christ's birth. It doesn't coincide exactly, but it's very close.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. That makes a lot of sense. And it was the rise of Mahayana Buddhism is often pegged right there between the first century BCE and the first century CE. And so, yeah, it's hard not to make the connection that you're drawing. And that's also when this notion of the Bodhisattva's vow becomes written about more, which is a very Christic incarnational move, and in contrast to the just seeking after nirvana and escape from suffering and leaving everyone else here. The Bodhisattva says, no, I'm going to stay until everyone else. That's a very Christic move that comes in right around the turn, of the first millennium. So yeah, Lorenzo, please.
Yeah, I also wanted just to expand a little on something I wrote in the chat. That is, we are not told that the redeemable moon has uh, no purpose. It's just something that Steiner leaves out of what is useful to say in that chapter, but we probably have something similar to what the adversaries and the guardians of the threshold are in this irredeemable moon. There is something I think that will bring further evolution because all the system works in this sort of way. So um, I wouldn't see that as an ultimate kind of problem. I think we can kind of imagine that there is a purpose to it. But it's true that the problematic aspect with races uh, has something to do with what we're talking about. And Ali mentioned it, and I wanted to bring it to the forefront because maybe this is something we could work more on. Because, as you said, Matt, there is a kind of speciation in this future that we see for humankind, and this cannot really be detached from the discourse on races. And I don't think that there is a direct correlation. And so maybe going deeper in this problem, we might also find some solutions to our questions regarding the treatment of race in Steiner. And we see that there are in all future stages of evolution, there is further splitting. So it's not just that we will see three different kinds of humans, but there will be humans that are still on the same level because they have not evolved. There will be humans that are on the highest level because they have always evolved, but everything that is in the middle is less determined. What is it? Something that stayed without evolving, and then in one of the further epochs chose to evolve, or there are some things that evolved in this epoch, but then that stop evolving. And when they are there at the same level, are they the same? Or would they present themselves phenomenologically as different races of a same kind? And so maybe should we look back at white, black, not as different kinds of humans, because there has been no speciation, but with humans that have different histories of when they evolved, let's say, horizontally, one as opposed to the other. Just some food for thought.
Yeah, these are important and difficult issues. In regards to the irredeemable moon, yeah, Steiner kind of leaves that hanging, but I think if we consider the ways in which, in all the prior planetary epochs, anything separated out from the main planetary body eventually is reunited with it. Now, he does say this moon is irredeemable, but these sevenfold cycles will continue, and if this is a spiritual ecology in proper ecological fashion, there is no away. You can't throw something away. Like there's nowhere for it to go. It needs to be somehow dealt with at some point. Um, and whether that's through a kind of, the church father origin, uh, would say that everyone is saved, nothing is irredeemable, and I'm not sure. I prefer to think of, in the grand scheme of the picture that Steiner is presenting, that something like that is the case. But at any given moment in evolution, it's clear that there's a kind of hierarchy here, and the only way that Steiner, and he wants to address this. I almost think in one of the revisions of occult science, he adds this last couple of paragraphs to chapter 6, which doesn't seem to fully flow with the rest of it, where the paragraph that begins, should anyone be prone to think that this account of cosmic evolution implies a fatalistic picture, he will have misunderstood it. To think that by this evolution a fated number of human beings will be condemned to belong to the bad humanity argues a mistaken notion of how the two realms, the external sense perceptible and that of soul and spirit, are related. And he goes on. And so, he felt the difficulty of this and had people probably bringing this to him 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago when he wrote this already. So that we're still struggling with this makes sense. Yeah. All right. Well, appreciate everyone's contributions today. We'll move on to session 19, next 20 pages next week from chapter 7. And I think that about brings us to the end. Wow. Yeah. So we're almost there. Look forward to bringing it all home with you all. And hope you all have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.